Hey everyone, it's Pastor Chris, and here we are in week 2 of our series called Black History Makers, where we're looking at the lives and legacies of famous Christians in history so that their faith story can inspire your own. Today we're going to look at the story of a man who paved the way for the civil rights movement. Richard Allen was born into slavery in 1760 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His family was sold to a slave owner in Delaware, but when the plantation struggled financially, his mother and 2 of his siblings were tragically sold off, leaving a young Richard, an older sister, and an older brother to be raised by their father. Reflecting on that day, Richard would say,
"My mama, 2 of my brothers, and a sister were sold. As was often the case, we never saw or heard from them again. My papa and the rest of us were heartbroken. In confusion and grief, I searched for answers."
And while searching for answers, Richard and his siblings heard about a church meeting that was happening at night deep in the woods near the plantation. Once there, Richard heard a preacher condemning the evils of slavery and talking about freedom that Christ died to give them, freedom from slavery and freedom from sin. The message captured Richard's heart. He asked Jesus to free him from all the chains and would later write,
"I cry unto him who delights to hear the prayers of a poor sinner. And all of a sudden, my dungeon shook. My chains flew off. And glory to God, I cried. My soul was filled. I was free."
A young Richard Allen was now on fire with his faith and ran around telling anyone and everyone who would listen about the love of God. And slowly but surely, the heart and skill of a preacher was born. But God's freedom for Richard wasn't complete. Eventually, Richard's slave owner became convicted of his sins as a slave owner and agreed that Richard could purchase his freedom for $2,000. Adjusted for inflation, this is about $70,000 in today's economy. And so while this wasn't entirely an act of grace by his former slave owner, Richard was inspired to work for his freedom. In 3 years, earning less than what we would call minimum wage, he had saved up enough money to purchase his freedom. Soon after, during the Revolutionary War, Richard found work driving a salt truck, and ever the evangelist, while he traveled, Richard saw this as an opportunity to continue preaching from Maryland to New York to Pennsylvania. Eventually, St. George's First Methodist Church in Philadelphia invited this gifted preacher to come preach to its black congregants. Allen was given the 5 a.m. service, but he was soon attracting an increasingly larger black congregation. However, the increasing number of black people in the church made the white members nervous and upset that things like their favorite seats were hard to come by. This continued until one day when Richard and his friend Absalom went to church. They sat down in their pew, and then when the service started, they knelt down to pray. But while they were praying, an elder of the church approached them and asked them to leave. Absalom told the elder that they would leave after the prayer time was done. The elder refused and started to lift up Absalom by his arm. Richard, sitting next to him, described what happened next.
By this time, prayer was over, and we all went out to the church as one. And there were no more played with us in that church.
It was a small but monumental moment in time. This moment would later be cited as the formative, if not founding moment of the nonviolent resistance that marked the civil rights era. Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin refusing to give up their seat on the bus, or the thousands of diners refusing to give up their seats during sit-ins could all trace their inspiration back to that brave group of black congregants in Philadelphia. That group that walked out formed their own congregation, and they started meeting in a blacksmith shop that was in need of repairs, but it served its purpose.
I put the first spade in the ground to dig a cellar for the African Methodist Church. This would be the first African American church or meeting house that was erected in the United States of America.
It was a significant moment in history in and of itself. This blacksmith shop is now called Bethel Church and the first black church in America. But it became historic for other reasons when later on it would be used as one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. For the next 2 decades, the Methodist denomination used litigation, fines, and harassment to stop Allen from declaring Bethel a Methodist congregation where black Methodists could worship freely. But Allen was undeterred and would write,
"If you deny us your name, you cannot seal up the scriptures from us and deny us a name in heaven."
The attempts of the Methodist denominational leaders to rein in Allen and his black parishioners reached a climax in 1815 when the Supreme Court ruled that Bethel was a legally independent church. And just a few months later, African American ministers from across the Mid-Atlantic region gathered in Philadelphia to bring their own congregations into fellowship with Bethel, and the African Methodist Episcopal Church was established. Today, the AME denomination boasts 2.5 million members nationwide in nearly 8,000 congregations. Now, this is just a snapshot of what happened in Richard's life, but hopefully you can see the character and the heart of a man who God used to do some incredible things. Richard died in 1831 at the age of 71 years old. Knowing his end was near and reflecting on a life of slavery and oppression and justice, Allen would write,
Lord, be thou my comfort and support at the hour of death, and then I shall be content to leave this world as a captive that is released from his imprisonment.
It's an incredible story. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment as a pastor, and in particular as a white pastor, to reflect on what this means for me personally. In the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah begins by confessing his sins to God and also confessing to God the sins of his forefathers. And I should be able to do the same, both for myself and also for the people I represent. I am deeply saddened by the way the church institutionalized racism and used God to deepen the divide between themselves and brothers and sisters like Richard Allen. And we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we've done and by what we've left undone. We've not loved you with our whole hearts, and we justly deserve your anger. And I am sorry. And I'm asking for your forgiveness so that we can work towards reconciliation and we can work towards being a church as diverse as the city we serve. And we can demonstrate among us the unity that Jesus has won for us through the cross. And you guys being here this morning and taking part in this discussion is one great way that we can all take a step forward. So thanks for being here this morning for the discussion. Have a great time, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.